President Trump is claiming success after the U.S. airstrikes on 3 key Iranian nuclear sites over the weekend. These images you see next to me are from inside the Situation Room, showing the president and his top advisors this is the day of the attacks. Now, the strikes hit the Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear facilities. Pentagon officials say the sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. Now, we've got some satellite images to show you. It reveals the aftermath of the strikes on Fordow. That's Tehran's most critical nuclear enrichment facility. The U.S. military dropped multiple bunker buster bombs on the site. They weigh 30,000 pounds each. But Iran is disputing the extent of the damage, saying it had moved critical material before the strikes. Protesters took their message to the streets of Boston, Los Angeles, and Denver over the weekend, speaking out against U.S. involvement in the war. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio discussed what comes next on Face the Nation yesterday.
What happens next will now depend on what Iran chooses to do next. If they choose the path of diplomacy, we're ready. We can do a deal that's good for them, the Iranian people, and good for the world. If they choose another route, then there'll be consequences for that.
CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand kicks off our team coverage for us from the White House this morning. Natalie, good morning to you. So a bit of mixed messaging coming from the president and his cabinet. President Trump said it is about regime change. Secretary of State Rubio said that's not part of the plan. So what is next?
Yeah, Errol, there is this mixed messaging because of a new social media post by the president. But let's start with what Secretary of State Rubio said to Margaret Brennan and Face the Nation, that this is not about regime change and that the U.S. is ready to meet with Iran and pursue diplomacy, hoping that that will be the next step that Iran chooses. But the president, in his Saturday night remarks, also said that if Iran does not choose peace, that they could face what he described as tragedy greater than when Israel's offensive on Iran began more than a week ago. Here's what the vice president had to say, speaking on Sunday on one of the morning shows.
We want Iran to give up their nuclear weapons program peacefully. If they're willing to choose the smart path, they're certainly going to find a willing partner in the United States to dismantle that nuclear weapons program. But if they decide they're going to attack our troops, if they decide they're going to continue to try to build a nuclear weapon, then we are going to respond to that with overwhelming force.
Now, Vance, a veteran himself who did serve in Iraq, says the U.S. is not interested in a long, protracted war, but now muddying the waters here is this new social media post by President Trump in which he says it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be regime change? A lot of people asking what this social media post means. That will be a key question going into today here at the White House, as everyone wonders what will these next steps be.
Yeah, some inconsistency in the messaging there from President Trump and his team. Natalie Brand with the latest. Thank you very much. Now, at this moment, there is a, quote, heightened threat environment, end quote, in the U.S. since the weekend missile strikes. A bulletin from the National Terrorism Advisory System doesn't list any specific threats, but it does warn of potential low-level cyber attacks by pro-Iranian hackers or cyber actors affiliated with Iran. In a statement, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said in part, quote, the ongoing Israel-Iran conflict brings the possibility of increased threat of acts of violence and anti-Semitic hate crimes. This morning, of course, we're keeping a close eye across global reaction to the U.S. strikes on Iran. And for more on this, let's bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio in our London newsroom. Ramy, good morning to you. So what are we hearing from the UK and other European allies of the States?
Errol, yes. Well, good morning. First off, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN nuclear watchdog, is right now holding an emergency meeting in Vienna, Austria. Its director, Rafael Grossi, has just said that the U.S.'s bombings probably caused very significant damage to Fordow, the uranium enrichment plant. And the quote here, given the explosive payload utilized and the extremely vibration-sensitive nature of those centrifuges down there, very significant damage is expected to have occurred. But no one can tell yet the extent there because inspectors aren't at that site. They're in country, but not at that site. Also on Sunday at the UN Security Council, he appeared to warn that the U.S.'s strikes on Iran could also bring an end to nuclear non-proliferation. He alluded to the possibility that Iran might, in fact, speed toward a bomb now. He also raised the question of what's actually happened to about 900 pounds of uranium that has been enriched to 60%. A reminder, 90% is weapons grade, but that is far higher than the 3.5% that they should actually be having. Separately, Iran's foreign minister, Sayed Abbas Araghchi, is now in Moscow. He flew over yesterday to meet President Vladimir Putin and said that Iran will now coordinate with Russia on some kind of response. And after he landed, he said that these two countries have common enemies and that the two are also, quote unquote, friends.
And Ramy, is there any clue as to how exactly Iran might retaliate?
Many, actually. Iran's government does have options for targets, Errol. These are military, and there is also economic targets, specifically energy, for example, in the Mideast. The U.S. has what some experts consider are 8 permanent bases in as many countries. Lighting up your screen there. In Orange, Qatar has the biggest U.S. base, Al Udeid Air Base. About 10,000 troops are believed to be there. Bahrain, just next door to the west, has a U.S. naval base, about 9,000 troops. Also, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq. About Iraq, a Mideast expert at British security think tank RUSI told me that U.S. assets there could be the next potential front line, and pointed to Iran-linked paramilitary groups also operating in the country.
All right, Ramy Inocencio in London with the latest on that. Ramy, thanks.
Of course.
Now, following U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear sites over the weekend, Israel and Iran are continuing to trade attacks this morning. We have some dramatic dashcam footage to show you that captures an explosion next to a road. This is in Ashdod, Israel, as Iran fired multiple missiles. Meanwhile, Israel's defense ministry says it's striking Iranian government targets in Tehran. For more on what is an escalating situation in the Middle East, we're connecting once again with Eric Loeb. He's an associate professor of politics and international relations at Florida International University. Eric, welcome back. Good morning to you. What reaction are we seeing inside Iran from these U.S. strikes? We know that Israel had taken out some of its military leadership, and there had been some discontent among the people toward its own leaders. So what is the reaction to all of this?
And thanks again for having me. The reaction in Iran is quite complicated. While there are many people who are vehemently opposed to this regime, the more that there's military pressure on the country from Israel and now the United States, the more that people are separating their antipathy towards the regime with feelings of nationalism, both inside and outside the country, and really feeling sadness, shock, and really fear and uncertainty in terms of what's going to happen next. And some Iranians are just prioritizing their own survival and the survival of their friends and family with such an uncertain future. So it's quite a complicated scenario in Iran. And it's not just a simple scenario where people are going to rise up against the regime at this point in time.
And it may be difficult for Iranians to separate what was an Israeli strike, what was a U.S. strike. What considerations might the government make when assessing potential retaliation? Because there have been scores of deaths.
Well, that's absolutely right. And this has also led to increased nationalism and concern in Iran from not just the government, but the population, with hundreds of people that have been killed and thousands wounded. We don't know the exact numbers, but the Iranian government is weighing their response and their retaliation. And the foreign minister has said that they will not negotiate with the U.S. until they've retaliated. Yesterday, the Iranian parliament approved plans to close the Strait of Hormuz and impose an economic cost on the United States. But that decision needs to be approved by the Iranian National Security Council, by the supreme leader himself. So we will see what happens, and we will see if Iran, to what extent they would strike U.S. military assets in the region, if they would do so on a large scale that would further escalate the situation, or if they may do so in a limited, measured way that may provide a diplomatic off-ramp for both sides to avoid an all-out war.
Yeah, and all U.S. forces in the region on a state of heightened alert. Eric Loeb, great to connect with you. Thanks for joining us.